I said it before we started recording, Stefan. It's incredible how much 180 minutes of football can change. We went into this international break with Germany probably being in the worst mood regarding the national team ever, and that's completely turned around. All of a sudden, there's euphoria. The 2-0 win against France, 2-1 win against... And this is obviously the more important of the two games because it's against the Netherlands, right? The old rival, the old enemy, beat them as well. And what I personally thought was the more difficult of the two games, we'll get into that later. But the manner of which it was done, the way the team performed, the way certain pieces performed, the way Toni Kroos took command over this team, Stefan, it just everything feels so different, and Julian Nagelsmann looks like a messiah coming out of this international break. There's really no different way of putting it. It doesn't matter which newspaper you open, which magazine you read. Every single one of them is just full of praise for Julian Nagelsmann because he got everything spot on in this international break.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, look, he's a good head coach, and there are plenty of good players in the German national team. So in a way, it's quite easy to look back in hindsight and be like, yeah, of course they were going to get it to work eventually. But of course that would obviously be very reductive. And I think a lot of hard work and I think a lot of clever tactics have gone into these two performances. We now know that, Nagelsmann now has his preferred 11. He now has his preferred system. For anyone who didn't watch the games, Nagelsmann picked the exact same starting 11 for both games, unless I'm mistaken. I don't think I am, but yeah, I think it's the exact same 11. Maybe some players may come and go, depending on form, injuries towards the end of the season. Maybe even some other players deserve to be in this team instead of others, which we could obviously get onto. But yeah, I thought both games, perhaps more than just about anything, showed that this starting 11 and this group of players for Germany know how to play with one another. They know how to compete with one another. They know how to, react to situations on the pitch. I think that's kind of been the big issue with Germany in the past, particularly under Hansi Flick and obviously before him, that if Germany conceded an early goal, things just kind of fall apart, and there's no one really there to kind of take control of the game. There wasn't anyone there to take control of the game. Wasn't anyone there who's really willing to stand up. There was no system, and I think that's the key thing. Germany now look like a well-coached team under Nagelsmann. They look like one of his his club teams, to be perfectly honest with you. They really remind me of his Leipzig side, to be honest, the way that so much focus on both wing-backs. I know they're technically full-backs in the back four, but they kind of turn into wing-backs because of obviously the fact that Toni Kroos and Robert Andrich are there to kind of slot in alongside the central defenders. So it's huge and impressive news for Germany going into the Euros because they've gone from being this dishevelled kind of group of individuals into what looked like a really well-built, well-balanced team. And Nagelsmann deserves credit, I think, in two regards there because A, it's his tactics and his coaching that have got this team playing so well, but also it's his courage to kind of say, no, I'm going to bring Jonathan Tah out of the kind of wilderness in terms of, international football. I'm going to start Florian Wirtz and Musiala together. I'm obviously going to drop the big central midfield partnership of Kimmich and Goretzka in favour of bringing Toni Kroos back, who maybe not the most popular person in Germany, considering the fact that, obviously
he might be now
popular as a player. Yeah, well, yeah, he is now, but after his retirement, obviously he had his podcasts and he was kind of making criticisms from the sideline. The fact that Nagelsmann was able to kind of brush it all aside and be like, no, he's going to be our main man in midfield. And then, of course, all the Stuttgart players who've come in, Mittelstadt, who played a big role in this game against the Netherlands. And that takes a huge amount of courage as a head coach. It shows how much confidence Nagelsmann has in his own conviction that he's able to say, no, Kimmich's going to play it right back because these guys are better in central midfield or vice versa and things like that. So, yeah, I think none of this would have been possible without Julian Nagelsmann, and they do look like a completely different team now that he's calling the shots.
Well, Kroos doesn't come back without Nagelsmann. There's no way, right? It was Nagelsmann in private conversation who convinced Toni Kroos that it was a good idea to come back. And yeah, you're 100% right, because this was a player who was, what was it? Sideway past Toni was his nickname, which is so ridiculous. Anyone who looks at his underlying stats can tell you really quickly that that's, pardon my language, absolute bullshit. But, he convinced Toni Kroos to come back. And the reaction to that was also incredible, because even before those 2 games, his jersey was the most sold jersey of the new pink ones, right? Which is also actually the most sold jersey in general. But, it shows you that it kind of gave the team a new impetus. And then, of course, his performances then underlined this. He was excellent against France. He was excellent again against the Netherlands, where he provided both assists. And he just seems to have kind of rekindled that spark for the national team a little bit with the German public, but also internally. Thomas Müller said some really interesting things after the Netherlands games. He said the mood was always very good at the German national team until we played the first game. And of course, he's now saying, like, well, now that it just feels different, because it's a group that seems to have chemistry within again. And maybe that's also due to the fact of how the team was put together, rather than, and this has always been Germany's biggest strength, that the team was not about the individuals. It was always about the group that was put together, right? Whether it was that 2014, 1990, etc., etc. We never went to a tournament with an all-star team like some of the other nations did, but Germany did always well at tournaments. It's funny that the moment they started to put together these quote-unquote all-star teams with the biggest names and just trying to shoehorn them into a tactical system and hope for the best, it was a very English approach, right, for many years. And it's funny now that we've disbanded that. Oh, wait, this actually works. Going back to the root actually works. And that was one of my major takeaways from this, that Nagelsmann picked the players that work for his system, as you pointed out, right? He went to different Bundesliga teams and said, well, Stuttgart are in great form. I want to play like Stuttgart. And that's actually one of my other major takeaways. This Stuttgart or Leverkusen, those 2 teams play this sort of football. Leverkusen doesn't have as many German national team players as they have. The most important one, maybe in Weth, but they don't have as many. Stuttgart play regularly with 8 or 9 German players in the starting 11, but they play that same kind of football, right? Trying to find triangles, try to find passes, try to break down an opponent by being patient, holding on to the ball, finding the space. And they did this against France, they did this against Netherlands. That was one of the things that I really noticed. There was long periods where Germany just held on to the ball, and even when they were under pressure, they would just find these triangle situations and pass along the ball. And the Stuttgart guys, Mittelstädt was often involved in that, for example. Führich was involved in it when he came on as well. I think that is one of the things that I really noticed. And that's almost also a little bit of a throwback to the pre-2014 era, where Germany were really good at that as well, right? It's just to be, this is the system we're playing. We're good at it. We don't care what the opponent is, because France and Netherlands, 2 very different opponents. We're going to stick to it anyways, even under adversity, like we go down a goal. And we're going to just slowly grind down the opponent, and we're going to win the match eventually. And you saw that in both those games. And I thought that was hugely impressive and a huge change from what we've seen previously.
Yeah, I mean, the word that kind of comes to mind for me is Das Reboot, in a sense. It's obviously not as dramatic as the last kind of 1 or 2, or depends where and when you think they happened. But obviously, we're not talking about an industry-wide reset in German football. We're not talking about like change the youth level or club level or things, but national level, there has been a huge reset. We just talked about the fact that Nagelsmann's come in and he's playing his own type of tactics, which I think are quite different actually from the way that Hansi Flick played. Maybe quite similar to how Jogi Löw's team were when they obviously won the World Cup, where he himself was trying to implement that kind of German take on tiki-taka, if you will, that very high possession style football. Nagelsmann himself maybe trying to go back to that, but that itself is a huge kind of departure from what Hansi Flick was trying to do. But also just the amount of star players that the national team have now moved on from. Manuel Neuer, obviously, now he's injured, so there's argument he obviously will be in the squad going forward, but I'd be very surprised if he replaced Ter Stegen as number 1 for the competition. Obviously, in defence,
I think he might.
Well, we'll see. Mats Hummels, my dog's actually barking in her sleep, so she doesn't agree with me either.
He agrees with you on the Manuel Neuer take.
She's a big Manuel Neuer fan. But even elsewhere through the team, obviously Manuel, Mats Hummels rather, is the other one who was obviously kind of unceremoniously dropped for these two internationals. We talked about Kimmich and Goretzka. You can even go further forward though. There's forward players. The likes of Serge Gnabry, Thomas Müller himself, still in the squad, but obviously not a starting player. Kind of reduced to more of a kind of impact sub, if you will, which I'm wary of how useful he has been these 2 games, but we can talk about that in a moment. But just back to front, really, whether it's personnel, tactics, system, whatever else you want to call it, or even just the method in which he calls people up. And Nagelsmann has just kind of wiped the slate clean and said, I'm going to do this my way. And I think that's exactly what Germany's needed.